how many people can we accommodate on that, under what circumstances? So we've been operating now for close to, what is it, 6 weeks, maybe even more. Is it 2 months already? Since we were allowed to open, since Shavuos, the Sivan, Tammuz, more than 2 months. Right? Since the week after Shavuos is when we opened up. And so it's working out very well. I think I'm there every day. It works out great. We just have a limit based on social distancing. So we'll see.
Are we ever close to the limit, or do we still have room? Do we still have capacity?
The only time I've ever seen that the base measures, the one base measures of the two button adjustments that are operating full was Ma'ariv Tisha B'Av night. And so all the seats that were there were taken. Now the seats are not perfect anymore because people moving around. So you have like family members can sit more on a table, right? Because they don't have the social distance. But we were at capacity. Literally every seat was taken.
You mean for Eicha?
No, the following night.
You mean Motzi Tisha B'Av?
Osfat, because there was no. Yeah, Eicha, a lot of people stayed in their own outdoor minyanim. For some reason, that one minyan, you know why? Because even the regulars, it was all one minyan. Everybody davened in one minyan, which we haven't had yet. Eicha wasn't as noticeable because people were sitting on the floor. So you can probably fit more people sitting on the floor than in chairs.
Who laned Eicha?
Heshi. That was the first. He has a completely different nusach for the third parak of Eicha. It was interesting.
Well, I asked Rabbi Loy about Yom Ne'Ram, so he told me he remembers before they built the new Beis Medrash, the old Beis Medrash was full to capacity, so they had a second minyan on Yom Ne'Ram in the basement, in the downstairs minyan, simply because there was not enough room. So I told him we're going to have a Chadash Yemenu Kedim. We're going to go back to our glory, where we have to make 2 minyanim because the shul cannot contain all of the people that want to come daven on Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, we'll see if we can try to avoid that. See if there's a way to open the wall. I don't know.
You mean to open the wall between the old and new Beis Medrash?
Right. The problem is that now that the Sfarim Shrunk is screwed into the wall.
Yeah, they permanently close it. Okay, let's see.
All right.
So Rami Bar Chama said yesterday that Hamachamer Acher Behemta B'Shabbos B'Shogeg Chayiv Chatas B'Mezit Chayiv Skila, and then there was a question about it. Rava questioned it. Rava said you have arrived from a brisa that totally is Avzeh. So the Gemara says it must be the Lav the Mechamer that's potter. The Gemara, no, maybe Tchumen, a little bit of Kiva, and Havara, a little bit of Yosef, that does not have a Chiyuv Skila or a Chiyuv Karban. Now the Gemara has a different approach. Rab Zvid Masni Hachi. Rab Zvid quoted Rami Bar Chama a little bit differently. The Rabbi Bar Chama that we had on Amud Beis said that both he's Chayiv Chatas and he's Chayiv Misa if one is over the Lav of Mechamer. Rab Zvid Masni Hachi. Rab Zvid had a different version of Rami Bar Chama's halacha. And he said, Ami Rabbi Bar Chama, Hamachamer Acher Behem B'Shabbos B'Shogeg Eine Chayiv Chatas, but B'Mezit Chayiv Skila. So now he splits it. It's a regular Isser, just like any other Isser of Chilul Shabbos, that if it's done B'Mezit, and there's a straw, you Chayiv Skila. But there's a special exemption just for the Chatas. And Rashi says, why would there be that exemption? So from Avodah Zarah, we only learn the P'tur for Chiyuv Chatas. But other than that, the Lav of Mechamer is no different than any other Lav of Shabbos, and therefore there'd be a Chiyuv Skil. Mosuf Rava, Hamachalal es Shabbos, if someone is Mechalal Shabbos, B'dover Shechayovin al Shigagosei Chatas, the Isser that he does is an Isser that if he would have done it B'shoyeg, he would be Chayiv Chatas, only then Chayovin al Zadonis Skila. So we could be medayik from this brisa. ha'ein chayavin al shigagase chatos, if you wouldn't be mechuyev for a chagig chatos, like Rabbi Bar Chama is now saying is the case by mechamer, so then ein chayavin al zadoin skila. So then there shouldn't be a chi of skila for the zadoin. So how could Rabbi Bar Chama say that there'd be a chi of skila for the zadoin? Zok the Gemara, mikatani ha'ein chayavin. You're making this diak from the Brisa. The Brisa doesn't necessarily say this beferish. You want to read it into the Brisa. Don't put words into my mouth. Hachika amar. This is what the Brisa means to say. Davar shechayavin al shilagos echatos. Anything where if you did the averi b'shoigi b'chayav echatos, hayavin al zayin skila. For sure, you'd be mechuyev. If you did it to mezid, you'd be mechuyev skila. However, v'yesh davar, there are things she'ein chayavin al shilagos echatos v'chayavin al zayin skila. It is possible that you're not chayiv on the shogeg chatos, yet you're still chayiv on the zayin skila. Umayniu mechamer. So, what's davke is if you're chayiv chatos with a shogeg, then for sure you're chayiv on the zayin skila. If you're not chayiv on the shogeg chatos, then it could be yes, it could be no for skila. But it happens to be that by mechamer you would be chayiv skila. Let's see what Rashi says. Look, Rashi, mikatani hach the yuka to the kinon. Ha, if you're not chayiv chatos, you're not going to be chayiv skila. Dilma hachi kamer. Maybe this is what the Brisa means to say. Ha-machal b'davar shechayavin al shilagos echatos, then chayavin al zayin skila. Ha-davar she'ein chayavin al shilagos echatos, yesh mehen shechayavin al zayin skila, such as mechamer. Yesh she'ein chayavin, and there are some that won't be chayiv skila. Umay niu the chayavin al zayin skila. In which case would you be mechuyev for the zayin skila, even though you're not chayiv for the shogeg chatos? Vein chayavin al shilagos echatos, mechamer. Mechamer would be the answer. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of a tangent. And before we do that, I just want to mention who the sponsors of this week's broadcast is. And I believe it's Betsy Friedman and Slazei Chanishmas of Berish Zolti. David, do you know what Berish Zolti's name is? Of Toiv Berish Ben? Do you know who Berish Zolti's father was?
Yeah, it's Yosef. It's Yosef.
Oh,
It's Yosef. You should know that name, Yosy.
I should, yes, that's right. Kama Yosef Ikibishuk.
Yeah.
So Yosef should have, the show should have no. So yesterday I said over my favorite member from my Berish Zolti. Today I'll say over my second favorite member that I said over already, but it's worthwhile repeating. Berish Zolti asks, it says, now we're waking up early to learn, Hava az kanamar gibur kari lasois v'tzoy nevicha sheba shamayim. Frek Berish Zolti, Tiden is a leib, nicht an az. Tiden is a nummer nicht stark. Verwusst stark nicht verkehrt. Hava gibur kanamar az kari lasois v'tzoy nevicha sheba shamayim. En with the Berish, well a nummer it kaimon is an a geber. And a geber it kaimon is an a nummer. So therefore couldn't say gibur kanamar. It had to say az kanamar. Okay, talk to Gemara weiter. Rava Achvod Rav Moya Baruch. Rava was the brother of Moya Baruch. So we know the story of Moya Baruch is this girl Rachel was kidnapped and she was raped by her captive, by her captor. She was raped by her captor, and eventually that captor became a ger. And his name was Isser Geyura. And therefore, since Mori's father was not Jewish, therefore we do not enumerate, we don't list his father as his yichus, we call Mori Bar Rachel. So Rava was the brother of Mori Bar Rachel. The Amrila, there are those who say, Avua to Rav Mori Bar Rachel. He was the father of Mori Bar Rachel, which is somewhat problematic, because if Mori Bar Rachel's father was Rava, was Jewish, that would cause a little bit of a problem. Listen to Basra, if you're going to say that Mori's father was Jewish, then it's a little funny in the Gemara, how the Rav, Achshurel of Mori Barachel, Umani, the portion of the Bavel. So in Maseches Yevamis, it says that Rav sort of made an exception, and even though Rav Mori Barachel was not the children of Jews, both his parents were not Jewish, nevertheless, he was still appointed into a position of authority in Babel. And that would not make sense why the Gemara would list it off as an anomaly, that even though his father was Jewish, he still made him into a minister. It wouldn't make sense for the Gemara to highlight that if Rav Mori's parents were both Jewish. So it must be that one of Rav Mori's parents weren't Jewish, so therefore it's not mistaber to say that his father was Rav. But the Gemara says, Dilma Trey Mori Barachalav. Maybe there are two Mori Barachos. So let's see Rashi for some historical background. Ramila Avua, the Rav Mori Barachol, Loy Garshinin. It doesn't make sense to say that. The Avua, the Rav Mori, we all know that the father of Rav Mori was Isser Geyurishmei, Isser the Ger. Uman the Garisle, and whoever is Garis that, Garis Basrei Hachi, is Garis, which is our Gemara, has the Girsa of the added information that the Gemara asks. That is, Lahach Lishna Basra, Kosha, Hach the Rav Achshere, the Rav Mori Barachol, Umanye, the Porsche the Bavel. Rav was Machshirim, and he listed him as one of the ministers of Babel. Hach Milsa B'Mesech Javamasi, the Porsche Balaz is a minstrel, I assume him as a minister, him Shoitrim. The Alpha Gab the Amar Mar, even though Mar said, Kol Mesima, Shata Mason, anytime you place someone into a position of authority, Lo Yehu Elami Keravachecho, it has to be from amongst your brothers. Hi, Kivan the Imam Yisrael, Mekeravachicha Krinba. So the Gemara says there that since his mother was Jewish, we allowed him to be a minister. But from there, it seems that, in fact, his father was not Jewish. And therefore, the Gemara says there must have been two Mori Baruchos, one of which was the son of Rav. Why would it have been called Mori Baruchel and not Mori Baruch? It would still remain a mystery. So let's see what the Gemara says. Over here. Back to our Shaila. So have a Masni law, he quoted this halacha about Mechamer in the name of a Mechel. And this is what he quoted. And Liftor, to say that it's potter across the board. Somebody leads his behema to transport something on Shabbos. Potter miklum. That person is completely potter. And even b'shogig, he won't even be Mechuyev Chatos. Why is that? The huksha kolater kulal avodah zarah. When it comes to Mechuyev Chatos, the only things that are Mechuyev Chatos, the only actions, the only isurim that are Mechuyev Chatos are things that you can compare to the act of avodah zarah. Now, once we say the mechamer is not a ma'isa, like we learned earlier, and therefore it's not comparable to the isur of avodah zarah, and therefore wouldn't be mechuyev achatos if it was b'shoigig, well then b'mezid nami loy mechayev. The fact that you're not going to be mechuyev for the shoigig also makes it that you won't be mechuyev for the mezid. How do you get that? Itnan hamachalol es haShabbos b'dover shechayoven al shegavasei chatos. If you're mechal Shabbos b'mezid for an avera, that if it was done b'shogig you'd be chayav chatos. Here the bach is very important. Then chayoven al zedoynei skila. Only then would you be mechuyev for zedoynei skila. Ha'ein chayoven al shegavasei chatos. But if you're not chayav al shegavasei chatos, ein chayoven al zedoynei skila. So he doesn't answer like we said before. Hachi kamar. He holds it's a good dick that the Brisa says that the only things that you'd be mechuyev al zedoynei skila are things that you're mechuyev al shegavasei chatos. Once we learn from avodah zarah that you're not chayiv al shegavasei chatos for the isur of mechamer, therefore there's no isur skila for the mezid. Now, Rabbi Yochanan takes it one step further. Belav nami loy mechayiv. You're not even going to get malchus. You're not even going to get malchus for the love of Chil Shabbos, where it says loisasa kol malacha. It's in the Aseret Shadibris. Why is that? The Havelei lav shanitin lasoris mitzvah. The lav of loisasa kol malacha is a lav that leads to Mrs. Bezdin, because most of the Isurim of Shabbos, if you over them b'mezid, you're chayiv misa. Any lav which in part creates a chayiv misas bezdin, v'chalav shenitna azaris misas bezdin ein like no. You could never get malchus if you're over a lav that the lav in certain cases leads to a chayiv of misas bezdin. So since this lav of l'sasaka malacha for other malachas creates a chayiv misas bezdin, even though the lav, it includes the lav of mechamer in it, but the lav of mechamer we know cannot get Mrs. Besdin because of what we learned from the Brisa. So once it can't get Mrs. Besdin, you won't even get malchus for it. So it's a lav to do mechamer, but there's no malchus for it. It's a great trivia question. Where do you have a lav that cannot get malchus for it? And that would be mechamer. Lazarus Mrs. Besdin Zakrashi, the shar malachas the Shabbos nami mehai kronaf lahu asara. The asara, the lav that is referring to all of the malachas of Shabbos is l'sasako malacha. Hilchach l'asarish Mrs. Bezdin. It's a lav that will lead to a Mrs. Bezdin. We know that there's a rule in the Torah that in order for there to be an oynish, there has to be first the lois aseh, telling us not to do it, and then the Torah will say in a different place, and if you do it, you'll be mechuyev this punishment. So the ashara for all of the lavin of Shabbos is l'sasako malacha. Tilkach icher asarasai l'mokem sheish b'misasai. So the lois aseh of l'sasako malacha is the lav that's referring to the actions that lead to a Mrs. Bezdin, the loin malchus. So kum techois, there would not even be a chi of malchus for the lav of mechamer, even though it's a bona fide lav of lois aseh kol malacha. Fafilu l'man omar loikin. And even according to the Mandamar who holds that you do get malchus, I have a special limud here by Mechamer to teach you that you don't get malchus. Why? Because the pasuk says, we say it in Kiddush, "V'yoyim hashvi Shabbos l'Shem Elokecha, lo yisasa kol malacha, ata uvincha uvitecha adecha v'amotzcha v'amtecha v'gerecha sheb'sherecha." It could have said, "Lo yisasa kol malacha." Why does it stick in ata? It seems to be indicating that there's a difference between the ata and the hemtecha. And that's what the Gemara is going to now darshan. Why does it stick in the word ata? The Gemara, who knew the mechayiv to teach you that you're only chayiv for an action that you do, when it's the behema doing the action, there might be an isser, but there's not going to be a chiv misa for it. Let's see Rashi. Afilu l'manda reloikin b'mesechus makis hacha afilu lav leka the ilas hure amalacha shal yodai the al yidei behemtei asa kagoy mechamer. If the intention of the loisasakol malacha is to say that there's also a lav on an action that's done in conjunction with your behema, the person together with the behema, and the only example of such a malacha is mechamer, so then lichtov loisasakol malacha ubehemtecha, which means you're doing it together with your behema, and that would include a lav for the issue of mechamer. My ata, the Torah makes you distinct. The ata, mashma ata levatcha ubehemtecha levada. We don't look at the combined malachas. The lav is only on one person alone. It's either the lav on you or the lav is on the behema. But if the lav is on the behema, you surely wouldn't get malchus for it. So therefore, you don't even have a lav on you. There's no lav on the person specifically to do the issue of mechamer. And therefore, even if you hold that a lav shenitna zorish Mrs. Betin loikin a lav, clearly here the lav of l'sasako malacha is not going on the person when he's doing an issue of mechamer. And therefore, if someone is over issue of mechamer, there's no korban chatos for shoygig, there's no misa for mezid with asra, and there's no malchus either.
So that should apply to the rest of the list as well.
Indeed, it would. It would. If you do a malacha together with bincha, together with avdecha, you wouldn't get an aver. That's only a derabban. It's shnaim shosua. But if they do a malacha, they'll get the malchus for it. So here the Rishonim explain here, if the behema does the malacha, yeah, the behema gets punished. But the behema, you don't give malchus, you don't punish behemoths. But if the behema is a malacha, it's not your malacha. The only way you could be mechayiv a person for mechamer is if you're mechayiv them for a joint malacha. And the Atta tells you there's no such thing as a joint malacha. Either you're responsible or the other person's responsible.
So we're saying because of the Atta, that separates it from the rest of the list. Isn't it logical that it should make it equal to the rest of the list?
Right. So that's why it's Atta lavadka, vehemtecha lavada, meaning it's each man for himself. You could only get malchus for an aver that you do yourself. They could only get an aver, malchus or misa for the aver they do themselves. So you're distinct from the behemoth. We don't look at a combined malacha done between two people or between the person and the behemoth.
So that's
by definition is a joint malacha.
So that, in other words, that's where we learn Shnaim Shasu P'turin?
I don't know, but it almost sounds like that. Although we don't need a limit for that because it's not kederch. Because Shnaim Shasura, when we actually had a machloikis, but most shittas hold that Shnaim Shasura's potter is not the proper way to do the malacha. But if it's a malacha that needs two people, like a heavy beam, most of the Tanoim hold that there would be a chiyuv, but there were Tanoim who held that even if it needs two people, you're still going to be potter because you're only chayav for one malacha. So maybe I don't know where the limud was. We had a limud for that time. I believe it was Reb Shimon who said that no matter what, if the malacha done for two people, even if the malacha requires two people, you'll still be potter. I don't think they referenced this pasuk. So that would be a good aura. Why wouldn't you know from this pasuk that Shnayim Shosua is potter? I don't know the answer. Because the Gemara only focuses on it lagabi behemtach over here. That's the good aura.
What's the issue that the behemoth is doing by Mechamer?
It's making an akira and a hanach.
Okay.
Because we learned earlier, we learned yesterday that it has to have that akira and the hanocha, right? So the Gemara said the way you get around it is while the behemoth is walking, you put it on the behemoth. So there also you needed a akira and hanocha. Zok the Gemara, Meisve. Hoisa behemtoi to una tevel. His behemoth was loaded up with tevel. Well, tevel is muksa because you can't do anything with the tevel, can't eat it. Or vasosius or glass, pieces of glass. So what do you do?
We skip something?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I got mixed up. I apologize. Zok the Gemara. We skipped a lot.
Not.
Zok the Gemara. Higia lechatzer hachitzayna. So the Mishnah tells us once you get to the chatzer hachitzayna, you untie things and you let them fall down. Omer Avuna. Hoyze behemte tun klezechuches. What if your behemoth was full of glass? And now, if you just let the sacks fall down, the glass will shatter. Definitely not something that you want. So the halacha is maybe korim uksosais. You could bring padding, pillows, blankets, mattresses. Umaniach tachta, put it on the ground underneath these animals. Umater hachavolim, and you open up the ropes. Basakin noif, and then the sacks full of these fragile items will fall, but since they'll fall on the mattresses, on the pillows, they won't crash. Did we not learn that if it's not muksa, you can carry them? A glass, why would that be muksa? It's a keli that you can use. So Gemara, the type of glass that we're talking about are in goblets. We're talking about they were small little syringes made out of glass that they would bloodlet with. They would do hakosas dam, and those are disgusting. And since they're disgusting, they're muksa machos mius, and therefore they're muksa the loy chazele.
Nehemiah is still in my head. Would he use this to support his position that every keli is muksa on Shabbos?
Are you talking about in the Havamina when the Gemara said that the Gemara thought we're talking about goblets?
No, yeah, regular.
Because now the Gemara says we're speaking about kalim that are used for akasas dam, where everybody would agree that's muksa.
Right, but Nehemiah doesn't have to do that.
Nehemiah said every keli is muksa unless you're using it for its intended purpose.
Right, and here we see that a kalim are muksa. Right, you don't have to make a prat according to Reb Nehemiah. He's very happy with this memra.
Well, I'm not sure about that because the Lashon of Brisa says noitel es hakelim hanitlim b'Shabbos. It's Rav Huna. I mean, Rav Huna says if you have glass, throw them down. The Brisa says you're allowed to take kelim. So Rav Nechemia would like Rav Huna, or Rav Nechemia Tana. He doesn't really need support from Rav Huna the Amora.
Got it.
And the Tana says the Tana that we're quoting seems to say quite clearly that noitel is a kelim hanitlim b'Shabbos, which probably is not consistent with Rav Nechemia, because here you're not taking the kelim for their intended purpose.
Sorry about that.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about that.
No, forget we're finishing Shabbos, and we're getting close to the end of Masechah Shabbos, and I'm actually I got a little bit attached to the Masechah Shabbos because Shabbos is the Masechta that sort of helped us retain our sanity through COVID. So for the rest of my life, I'm going to think of Shabbos as like an escape from the harsh reality of my life, because during COVID, Shabbos was our savior. It was what helped us keep our sanity. It was our diversion from what was going on around us. So I appreciate the reminders of Nehemiah. Every sheet that we had, is warm and fuzzy in my heart. So shkoyach for reminding us about Nehemiah.
Okay, so we'll give a special.
Are the halachas also fuzzy?
What was Rav Huna referring to when he talked about glass kalim that were muksa? But kind of the umna, they're disgusting. They're for sure muksa. Frek the Gemara, how could you allow these kalim that are muksa to fall on mattresses and pillows that are not muksa? Once these muksa kalim fall on the mattresses, now you cannot use those mattresses anymore, and you're not allowed to be mevatel klima yechonoi. We had this regarding putting a keli under an egg to catch it. We had it regarding putting a keli under sparks, under oil dripping, that you're not allowed to be mevatel klima yechonoi. Zok to Gemara, b'shlifi zutri. We're talking about small sacks that have these glasses in them, and what they did was they would pile up a whole bunch of sacks, a whole bunch of pillows, and because let's say that an animal could be 6 feet off the floor, you're not going to put a small mattress 6 feet below it on the floor and let these glasses fall; they'll still crumble. So that you would pile up a whole bunch of pillows, so that when you untied these little glasses, they fell very lightly onto the top layer of mattresses, and then you pulled one mattress off from underneath it. You were able to lift the mattress out from underneath it, and it fell further. And you slowly kept on pulling the different mattresses out from underneath this sack of glass tubes until the glass tubes were on the floor and all the sacks were actually still usable. So basically, it was done in such a way where you're not being about the klima echad, because it's only sitting, these vials of bloodletting tubes would only be sitting very temporarily on each of the mattresses because you pulled them out from underneath. What if you had an animal that was loaded up with tevel or associates, pieces of glass? So mater es a chavolim, you undo the ropes that are tying this onto the animal, and the sakin will fall down. The ava bishop is sharpened, even if they break. Frek the Gemara, why should you let them break? Why can't you save them? Zok the Gemara, hasam b'cholsa. There, we weren't speaking about kalim that were made out of glass. We're speaking about glass sheets that anyways will have to be broken into smaller pieces to service whatever needs they were. Rashi says, b'cholsa chatichas rechavish oskuchas, large flat pieces of glass that are going to be cut down for whatever they're going to be used for. She'enim kalim. V'oisim and chaloinis, you make windows out of them. Since there's no damage in them breaking, because eventually you're going to cut them into small pieces anyway. Therefore, those were not matter to bring stuff underneath it. Dekanami, and I'll prove it to you that these things could not be used the way they are. The katani dumya de tevel. The Brisa says tevel and associates. So the glass must have this similar traits to the tevel. Ma tevel d'loy chazalei. Just like the tevel are muksa because they can't be used now. Can't be used. No, afachanami. So to the glass that we're talking about aren't goblets that can be used, rather than things that cannot be used. Afachanami loy chazalei. Correct the Gemara. Umay afal pisha mishtabrin. What does it mean afal pisha mishtabrin? It's mashma to say that even though they're going to be damaged, you're still not allowed to take them off. If you're telling me that big, large pieces of glass, when they break, there's no damage because anyway you're going to cut them down. What does the Brisa mean? Afal pisha mishtabrin, indicating that there is some loss. So the Gemara, when you cut glass to size, you maximize every last square inch of the glass. Here, if it shatters, it's inevitable that there's going to be some small shards that are going to go to waste. So you might think they're choshish even for those small shards to protect them, and you'd be able to put karamuk sauces underneath them. Kamash malon, for that small loss, we don't care, and therefore you just have to untie it and let them crash down to the floor. Tanya Reb Shimon ben Yochamer. What if his behema was loaded up with a bundle of tfuah? The halacha is, or a sack of tfuah. So it's lying across the animal. You have to get it off. It's not tied down, but it's not going to fall off on its own. So what you do is, you can use your head and go on one side of the donkey and put your head underneath the tfuah, and push with your head till the sack is leaning over to one side, and then and then it'll fall off by itself. Zok to Gemara. Now this shluf shel tfuah, I guess it's tevel. It has to be tfuah that's a muksa. Now an interesting story. Once upon a time, Rabbi Gamliel had such a situation where his donkey was loaded up with honey. He did not want to unload the honey. He wanted to leave it on top of the donkey. And what happened is the weight of this honey sitting on the donkey al Shabbos, the donkey ended up dying because it couldn't handle that weight sitting on it all the time. Honey is not muksa. Why couldn't he just take them off? So we're talking about spoiled honey. Spoiled honey is not useful on Shabbos. That would be muksa. If it was spoiled honey, why was Rabbi Gamliel transporting it? Why would he give it value to transport it? So tomorrow lechatisa de gamli, they used to smear the areas of the camels, their knees, their areas that got raw. They would smear them to protect them from getting inflamed and from getting irritated. That's what he had it for. Time see?
Why was he not worried about Tzar B'Lachim?
The Gemara is going to discuss it. It's a very good question. The Gemara is going to discuss it. V'yater chavolim v'yiplu sakin. Zok to Gemara, why doesn't he open up the ropes and let them fall? Zok to Gemara, mitzdur ziki. What's going to happen is it's going to damage, it's going to make dirty what it's going to fall on. What's going to happen is these barrels or these containers that have the honey in, they're going to break if they fall down. And therefore, he didn't want to do that.
Interesting. Our scroll says the honey would have been ruined.
I'm sorry, the honey would have been ruined. I apologize.
No. I'm saying, but if the honey is ruined, we already said it's really not good. I don't understand.
No, it still has a purpose to be used like this. The gamli. If it breaks, you wouldn't be able to use it for that.
Ah, got it. Okay.
That's why you can't let it fall. So use the eitzah that the Mishnah said earlier. Put padding underneath it. The Gemara says it will make the kalim dirty. It'll make the pillow dirty. If you have jugs of honey that might be oozing a little bit on the outside and they're sticky, if they fall on your pillows, they'll ruin your pillows. Then you have the problem of kavata kli mechanai. In the earlier case, we said you just slide the pillow out from underneath these glasses. But if they get dirty and sticky from honey, so then your taka going to be mevata kli mechanai. You're not going to be able to use those pillows anymore that Shabbos. Now the Gemara asks Chaim Tzvi's kasha. Well, how could Rabbi Gamliel ignore the issue of tzar b'lachayim? So the Gemara kasaver tzar b'lachayim d'rabbanan. So Chaim Tzvi is going to ask, so if it's d'rabbanan, but he still have tzar b'lachayim, No, but the whole word is since it's only the Rabbanon, he holds that it cannot be doiche the Isra of Muksa. If Tzar Balchaim is Dairaisa, then Rashi says it'll be doiche it'll be the Rabbanon, but less the Dairaisa of Tzar Balchaim, the Lichi the Rabbanon of Bidul Klimei Chanoi. But since Tzar Balchaim is only the Rabbanon, so he has no right to make the Rabbanon of Tzar Balchaim be doiche the Rabbanon of Bidul Klimei Chanoi. Right, so he has to do Shav Tasa. Abaye Ashkechele le Rabba, the Komishav Shefle le Berei, Agabe de Chamra. Abaye found Rabba was playing with his child, and he was holding him up. He was holding the child up against the side of the Chamor and rubbing up and down. Somehow that was entertaining the child on Shabbos. Omer lei Komishtamish Mar beBalichaim. Abaye asked his Rabba, how could you do that? You're using Balichaim, and we know the halacha is utnan lo yiroich min al gabe behema. You're not allowed to be mishamish with a balchai on Shabbos. I'm not putting the child on top of the animal to ride it. I'm just rubbing it against the side. Rashi says he's only rubbing it on the side. So the key is that's not the normal derech of how an animal is used, and under those circumstances, Rabban like Roshba. So this technically is being mishamish b'balachayim, but it's not this type of tashmish that the Rabbanon answered. Therefore, I'm allowed to play with my child that way. So the more utstaden like Goshabu, Rabbanon. I'm sorry, utstaden like Goshabu Rabbanon. Rabbi said b'lashon lechusa that the Gzeir the Rabbanon was not on staden. Miyot how do I know that? The Tnan we learned mater chavalim. You open up the ropes, vasak and neiflin, and the sacks fall. Well, how am I supposed to do? Let's envision this. You have two bags, saddle bags that are sitting on the side of each of the animals, and they're tied together on top. So in order to let those saddlebags fall, you have to lean over on top of the animal, untie it, and then the saddlebags will fall. There's no way you can get over to the top of the animal without somewhat leaning on the side of the animal. So you see that you're allowed to lean on the side of the animal. This is my love, the chaver gavalki, the haveluk sudden. It must be that there are side sacks that are tied up on top that you need to lean on the animal to get there. And you see from here, it's sudden like Gozu Barabon. So you don't have a right from there. Maybe it's Bechaver al Gavki. The law of sudden. Maybe they're not tied on top. Maybe there's some type of clasp on top that it's very easy to untie. You just reach over with one hand and unclip it, and they'll fall to the ground, but you don't necessarily have to untie something which would require that you lean on the animal. Inami Belachta, which was a different type of Rashi speaking about wine bags, wine flasks that were tied. Again, they're all things that are easy to disconnect with one hand. You don't have to lean over. So therefore, you don't have a raya from there that's stadner mutter. Something more about your What happens if you have two walls for a sukkah? We know a sukkah needs to have three walls. So two of the walls were regular man-made walls, and the third one vachas pilon. And the third wall was on the tree. So the sukkah is kosher because you're allowed to have a wall that's about ilam. But you're not allowed to use this sukkah on Yom Tov because you're being mishamish with a tree. You're not allowed to use a tree on Shabbos. Now there's a shaila between Rashi and Tosfos exactly how this was constructed. Either it's a question of the schach was leaning on the tree or the floor of the sukkah was leaning on the tree. So the Gemara gets into details of what this construction was. My lav the chok baby ilam. Let's say I had two walls, and then on the third, I took a tree, I drilled holes into it, and I put a horizontal beam. On one side, it was leaning on the tree, or was in the hole that I drilled into the side of the tree, and the other end of the beam was supported by leaning on one of the walls, or by being fastened to one of the walls that I made. And now I can put schach above it. So let's say that was its construction. If my beam is drilled into the side of the tree, that's studna of the ilam. That's not resting on top of the ilam. So you have a raya from here, it's studna asurin. You have a raya from here that even using the side of something, which might not be the normal tashmish, is also asur. What I did was I took two trees and I bent a branch from one tree and I fastened it to the second tree. Then I took a branch from the other tree and I fastened to that tree. So now I have two branches that are going across, looking something like this, and that creates a base upon which I put the schach. So now I'm not using the tree midstoten. I'm actually using it right on top, and that's maybe what the Brisa says is usher. So you don't have a raya. So you don't have a raya that stoden is going to be usher. In fact, the Gemara, ihachi emesefa. How about if it's sholosh b'deyadim? You have 3 kosher sukkah walls that are made by man. The achas bil, and only the 4th wall was made to the tree. There it says kshera ve'oilun lo b'yomtiv, and you're allowed to go up on Yom Tov. In fact, the Gemara v'ida kavya li'ilon. If we're talking about that you're resting right on top of the tree, amai oilun lo b'yomtiv. How could you go on Yom Tov? Sure, it might be a kosher sukkah with the 3 walls that are man-made, but the fact is you're still being mishamish on an ilon, which you wouldn't be allowed to do. So Gemara, the elamite studin asurin. How does this kasha help you? Let's say studin were asurin, so you still have the same problem. Soif amai oilin lo b'yomtiv. How can you go on yomtiv on a tree, even though it's only the 4th wall? So the only way you can explain why in the last case of the brisa, where the 4th wall is a tree, where you're allowed to go up on yomtiv, is a lahazam b'gavasa persachna. The ilan gufei doifen ba'almahu the shavir. You have to say that it's not that you're leaning any schach on it. You're not leaning any schach on it at all. You just used a tree that sort of had a wide stance, like an evergreen tree maybe. You had a wide tree that you just used to be as a partition for the 4th wall, but you're not even resting the schach on it. It's just a standalone item that's completely independent of the sukkah, but it's acting as a 4th partition.
I put my hand down, but now that you stopped anyway, the chamor is still suffering in my head. I just wanted to. I was just looking at the Gemara closely, and I wanted to make a suggestion that the Gemara says that the honey would have been ruined, and that's why Rabbi Gamliel didn't allow the honey to fall. Remember?
Right. Correct.
Question is, why would Rabbi Gamliel was a rich man? Obviously, he would. Of what would he rather choose? A dead chamor or honey that gets ruined? I think a chamor would be worth more. And if that's the case, then he would have made the cheshbon that he would have let the honey get ruined rather than lose his chamor. So it's possible, meaning the chamor is suffering, and I don't understand why Rabbi Gamliel would allow the chamor to suffer. So I want to make a suggestion that it wasn't obvious to Rabbi Gamliel that the chamor had such a heavy load, meaning that the load was so heavy, and he thought that the chamor would be okay. Because otherwise,
I think that makes sense. I think that's partial. The Gemara is saying it as a maisa, which means it's not a common occurrence. It happened, and Rabbi Gamliel probably learned from there not to do it again.
Well, yeah. Well, the question, of course, is why did it happen in the beginning? But somehow it happened in the beginning. But I would think...
Yeah, because Rabbi Gamliel wasn't worried about the tsar. But had he known it would die, maybe he would have done differently.
Yeah.
But,
yeah,
but I don't know, because this is a shaila of halacha.
Right.
He held it, look, it's also to violate an isser to rabbanon of v'ata kli meichonai. I don't know if the equation changes just because the animal's going to die.
Well, it seems to not change, even though the animal has suffering, right? The Gemara did tell us
that suffering is not a problem because you're not allowed to violate one derabbanan because of another derabbanan.
And so, why wasn't there on the solution? Why aren't we worried about the chamor? Somehow, I'm worried about this donkey. I can't get it out of my head.
We are, but it's a derabbanan.
So let's do something about this derabbanan. Meaning, I don't mean to fix up the Rabbanon, but do something. There was no other way that we could figure out that Rabbi Gamliel would have figured out how to help this chamor in such a way. That's why I'm saying that it wasn't obvious.
Well, you're saying he should have just let his honey break.
That's what
he should have just destroyed his honey.
And that's why I want to suggest that it wasn't obvious to him that the chamor was suffering.
That makes sense. Dekanami. So we have a raya here. That it's a 4th tree and nothing's really leaning on it. It's just a 4th wall. The katani zaklal. The Brisa says a general rule. Zaklal. Kol she'ilu. Yinotela ilan. B'choy l'lamoid. Any time that if you would remove the tree, the sukkah would remain intact, then oilun l'biyotov. Shema, as you see from here, that this tree was a 4th wall and it was totally independent. And even if it was removed, you'd have a full kosher sukkah. Shema. Let's say that studden, whether or not you're allowed to lean on the side of a tree or the side of an animal, let's say it's a machlokas tonight. Because it says in our brayso, "Ein oil no b'yomtiv." You're not allowed to go up on yomtiv onto a sukkah or into a sukkah. The Rashi tells us that whenever we talk about going into a sukkah, the Mishnah always refers to it as oilin. You're going up to the sukkah. Because I guess in those days, I think Rashi says they used to make their sukkahs, the ArtScroll speaks it out, they used to make their sukkahs on top of roofs. So the normal expression of going into the sukkah would be oilin. You're not allowed to go into this sukkah on Yom Tov if the third wall is a tree. So my let's say this is the machlokes. The Ma'asav Tzad Nasur and the Ma'asav Mutarin. Maybe everybody would agree that Stadn are Asurim. This is not Stadn, this is Tzidei Stadn. Because the way it works is if we're talking about the schach, there were holes drilled into the side of the tree that you put beams on. You're not leaning on the beams. On top of the beams, you put the schach. And the reason why you're talking about using the schach is people would store their kalim on top of the schach. People would put their items on top of the schach. So the schach is leaning on the wooden beam, and the wooden beam is being supported by a tree. That's studied Stadn. And say, Ma'ar Savar Tzadei Stadn Asurin, Umar Savar Tzadei Stadn Mutarin. Rava says, no, I don't agree that that's the machlokes. Rava Amar Man the Asher B'Stadn, Asher Nami B'Tzadei Stadn, and Man the Shari B'Tzadei Stadn, Shari Nami B'Stadn. Rava holds there's no mokim to make a difference in between the two. If one is going to be mutter, they're both mutter. If one's usher, they're both usher. Chaychi, your shaila about Tzar Chaim reminds me of a story about a fellow who bought a horse, and it was a phenomenal horse. It did great work, but it ate so much. And he says, it does good work, but it's costing me a fortune. It's a gas guster. So he decided that he's going to try to get the animal to live off less. So he cut the animal's food intake in half. And the first couple of days, the animal was sluggish. It took a couple of days, but then the animal was back to its normal workload. It was good. So he says, I already cut my fuel cost by 50%. But he says, it's still so much. So he did it again. He cut the food supply again in half. Again, the animal struggled for a little while, but then the animal was able to produce 100% again. Then he says, you know what? It's still too much. I'm not going to feed the animal at all. And the animal continued to work hard, and then it died. He says, I can't believe it. I finally perfected this animal, and then it dies on me.
I have two comments. One comment is on sukkah. You could say malan b'kedusha, and that's why they were using the word oilen to the sukkah. That's right. Number one. Number two, I'll tell you a true story. In the 20s, there was a tzaddik, a yid that had a seltzer route on the east side, and he sold his horse at the end of when he retired. He sold his horse to his neighbor, the guy. A couple of days later, the guy comes back to him and says, I can't use your horse. He's got a funny habit. So the yid says, what is that? What do you mean? So he says, every day, no matter how much I clop the horse, he stops for 20 minutes at sunset. And no matter how many times I tell him to go, he doesn't go. Stops for 20 minutes. So the yid said, I know why, because I always stopped for mincha at sunset. And the horse got used to this break. So he says, if you want, I'll take the horse back. So he took the horse back, and he cared for the horse until the horse died. So when the tzaddik, Rav Herman, Mr. Herman, heard this story, he said, look at that. Even the tzaddik comes back to the tzaddik.
Beautiful. I'm pointing to the Rashi where it says what I said. Kol kedusha b'sukkah noket b'loshen aliyah b'mesech sukkah levisharuban oisin sukkaseim b'roish gagon.
Yeah. I'm just saying a chassidish pshat.
On sukkahs, people are when it's raining. My kid asked me, "Are we eating outside?" I said, "No, we're eating inside the sukkah." I don't like when they call the sukkah eating outside. I call the eating in the sukkah eating inside the sukkah. If it rains, we have to eat outside the sukkah. Okay, how about tzlocha dikadei? Okay. Go ahead.
What time are we learning tomorrow night?
Should we do the regular time? 10:30?